This interview is made possible by the View Conference. I'm your host, Jerry Orrs, and right now we are with Matt Omernick, who is the CCO from Akili Interactive. And Akili Interactive is an absolutely incredible company. They make medical treatments for people with major disorders, but the incredible thing about their treatments is they are closer to video games than normal medical treatments. They are interactive, they are fun, and I just love that technology so much. Most recently, their treatment for ADHD has been approved by the FDA. And Matt, before we get into everything this amazing company is doing, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how exactly can these interactive treatments help people deal with disorders like ADHD?
Sure. Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, we're really excited about the recent news, and but more importantly about the bigger picture of what we set out to do as a company, which is to really change the status quo of medicine, and help those living with cognitive impairments, and that is, includes things like ADHD, but it goes way beyond that. There's so many areas uh, about the brain that we still don't really fully understand, and I think neuroscience and even individuals are really starting to recognize that our cognitive health is just as important, if maybe not more, than our physical health. And so we see a really near future where everyone pays as much attention to their cognitive health as they do their physical. Um, so we founded the company upon kind of that general idea. We also wanted to make sure that we were creating a new kind of medicine that's frankly just wasn't as scary as a lot of the medicine that's practiced today, and recognizing that technology gives us many new opportunities to be able to create an experience for patients that in many cases is not just smoother, but can actually be enjoyable. And so there's a long list why video games happen to be an excellent vessel to deliver this kind of medicine. And that's something I can talk about for hours. So I'll pause there.
Well, I would love to talk to about it for hours as well. And I'm a personal fan of video games. I think video games are amazing ways to teach concepts and show kids different perspectives. But something I love about your job is CCO, Chief Creative Officer. You are very much in a creative role in what is a medical company. Like you said, it's about the sciences of it, the cognitive sciences of it. How can it treat disorders of the mind? So could you talk a little bit about the day-to-day life of having a creative role in what is otherwise a very medical company?
Certainly. So yeah, my background has been exclusively in the entertainment world, not healthcare, I guess, unless you count the last 8 years with Achille, which I've learned a tremendous amount. I feel like I'm getting a slow drip PhD over time. Um, but so yeah, I come from originally an animator working in film and TV and games, especially for the last 20 years, and loved every single minute of it. Incredible industry and incredible opportunity to work with some of the most amazing and creative people, uh, and create some amazing products that make people really happy. But I initially, even while I was still working at LucasArts, I had met Dr. Adam Ghazali, who was a neuroscientist that came up with some of the original technology for what led to Achilles' founding. And I became obsessed with what he was doing and what neuroscientists were doing when they were looking at even off-the-shelf video games at that time. Because anyone that's ever played them, like you said, knows there's something extremely powerful going on there. And I think the power of games has been underestimated for a long time. And I think the stigma that is sometimes associated with them is really unfounded in a lot of cases. Um, so I became immediately obsessed with this idea that you could use games to actually physically change the brain if you did it in a very precise, targeted way, to improve people's lives in a way that they could never have before. So I was instantly hooked at this concept, and so I came over to UCSF on nights and weekends and brought some engineers from Lucasfilm over, and we worked on the original prototype. It was called NeuroRacer, and that study that we ran at that point ended up on the cover of Nature, which I didn't appreciate, but for a neuroscientist, that's like apparently like getting the Academy Award, being on the cover of Nature. So by the time that even happened, like we knew we had something incredibly powerful and wonderful for people here, medicine that is effective and safer than a lot of pharmaceuticals and medical devices that are out there. We had something really incredible that can improve lives. So I decided to shift careers, I guess is the way to put it, out of the traditional games and entertainment industry into this, what is a brand new industry at this point in time. And knowing right when we founded the company that one of our greatest strengths as a company and our greatest challenges is going to be we were combining two or three industries that could not be more different, right? We have offices in Boston and in San Francisco for that reason alone. We wanted the best of healthcare, the best of medicine, and the best of technology and entertainment. And we knew that we were combining, two very different industries, very different kinds of people and view. And we knew that that diversity and that access to all these different ideas was going to be one of our superpowers, but we also knew it would be challenging. So creatively, to get to your question, I went into this with open eyes, knowing that there would be challenges and opportunities. And what I found really quickly was that this has turned out to be the most creative opportunity I've ever had in so many ways that I never would have had access to in just the traditional games industry. And I can start by talking about the games themselves, right? These are being created in a super precision way, right, to activate a specific part of the neural network in the brain. And therefore, there are some pretty rigid guidelines on what you can do with the game, right? There are certain core mechanics that are doing that job, right, in the brain. So we have to maintain those and stick to them, but we have to make those fun. And so as opposed to just making any other game where you're like, okay, what should we do? We can do anything and it'll just be awesome and fun. This was a pretty strict box to be within. And at first that was a little bit scary, but what I found, and what I have learned over the years, true for creative people anywhere, is you give them a box, they're actually going to be more creative. It gives them some bounds to work in, and it says, okay, well, I know these things are off limits. Now I know what I can do and what I can't do. And that just suddenly opens everything up. So creatively, that was kind of my first dose of something very different, is having a box that tight to work with. And then secondarily, it's my definition of creativity has broadened so much as I've started to work with neuroscience and data analytics and all these folks from the health and the pharma and the medical device industry and regulatory folks, and realizing that creativity is simply being open to new ideas and being able to think outside the box and being able to be kind of bold and be excited about that when there's a problem that hasn't been solved before. It's creative people that run after that, not run away from it, right? So what we've learned as we've grown Akili is that is probably the most important feature for anyone that we bring in, is that they have this kind of hungry, lifelong learner, open mind, run at unsolved problems type of personality. So yeah, there's a ton there, but yeah, it has absolutely been the most creatively rewarding position and job I've ever had.
I think your experience really points to some facts about creativity, some universal facts. Like you said, if you put in a box, you're more creative. And that's so counterintuitive. Most people don't think that, and they just want barriers gone. But I love how you embraced it and grew from it. Now, in another way, Akili Interactive also puts you in limitations in the types of resources you had access to, because Akili Interactive, compared to Microsoft and LucasArts, is a much smaller company. It's still trying to define itself in a defining industry. I mean, this is something that you guys are innovating yourselves. It's not something that existed before you. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from this big job at a very big company to leading the reins of a very small company, just taking its first steps in life?
Yeah, absolutely. For most of my career, I had worked at larger, more structured, more I guess long-founded companies, and I had dabbled occasionally in between at some small startup type things. And once I got a taste of that, there was just something that wouldn't leave my brain. Even though I was very happy at places like LucasArts and Microsoft and Electronic Arts, wonderful places to work. I always had this thing go in the back of my brain where, I guess I'll put it this way, Jerry. Like I've drawn this graph in my head, which is my career path, if I imagine it. I don't imagine it being this like linear curve up. I'm not trying to just like, oh, just do this and get promoted and do more and more. What I realized really quickly is I want this. I want up and down, up and down. And I mean that, like, I've learned that I love to go after a crazy new idea and try to bring that idea to reality and get my hands really dirty doing it. Like, I love to make art. I love to still, light and texture and model and animate and create art. Like, that's always important to me, and I love to get my hands dirty there. And then I love to surround myself with people who are way better, way smarter, way more creative than I am, and build an awesome team, and then support that team like crazy so that they can do mind-blowingly wonderful work, right? And that gives me great fulfillment. But kind of at that point, then I'm like, okay, I've done that. Now I want to go back down and get my hands dirty and do that all over again. And so if I had to predict my career trajectory at this point, it's like this. I want to continue to do that. And so that kind of clicked with me during the same time frame where I saw this opportunity to found Akili and bring this new type of medicine to the world. And so once I got that taste of starting it up from scratch and being able to continue to build the teams as we are today, it's very clear to me that that's what I want to continue to do. So I absolutely love it.
Well, it really looks like the company's doing incredible work. And something I also want to talk about is you are in a creative role, but you're also a chief executive. You know, you are in a leadership role, and that requires a lot of communication. I love what you mentioned before about the organization of the company, just in terms of geography. There's an office in San Francisco that's basically a video game company, an office in Boston that's a medical company. And, you know, of course, there's a lot of differences both just in the focus, in the atmosphere, and there's a lot of space between them. There's a time zone between them. So in terms of communication and leadership, how do you manage those many factors in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, great question. We, recognizing that early, as we were growing, that communication without question is going to be the most important thing for us, given those varied backgrounds. And I think anyone that's worked in industry or life realizes that anytime you come to any kind of conflict, if you really peel it all apart and get down to what it was, a communication thing, right? So knowing that was really important, especially for Akili, we agreed to travel a lot, honestly, in the early days, like as a strategy and executive team, and frankly anyone at the company that would benefit from the cross-pollination. We really supported kind of travel and making sure that we used every tool possible to communicate super well. We really just invested more in communication tools and communication opportunities than most companies at our stage. We did that super early and consistently. What's odd is today, we're not traveling back and forth, obviously. But one of the things that has kind of surprised us with being 100% remote and everyone staying in place on the two coasts is that some of the communication issues and some of the maybe occasional misunderstandings have kind of vanished. In some ways, it's like even the playing field in an unexpected way. And so, we certainly plan to go back and have our offices, when the time is there. But we're not in a rush. We've really built all these tools to communicate well before anything, any pandemic. And so we were already pretty skilled and pretty ahead of most companies on being able to work remotely and be able to communicate effectively. And so we're not in a hurry. We're being incredibly productive, and communication is actually pretty good right now.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear that the company was able to adapt. And, even people outside of strictly a company like Akili Interactive, the video game industry is just a place of adaptation. Technology is changing rapidly. We just had a series of huge announcements in video games. You can see how different they are than the last generation. So what tips would you give to video game artists coming up? Because more and more are going to the industry every year. What tips would you give them to stay on the cutting edge and making sure that their work is really the best it could be?
Sure. There's a lot there. I mean, the number one thing I would say is to stay on the leading edge. To that part of your question, you really have to look for the scary unknown thing, right? You have to look at the thing that isn't fully realized, right? You have to look at the area or the areas even within games where a lot of risk is being taken and things seem a little bold and crazy, right? If it doesn't feel a little uncomfortable, you're probably not on the bleeding edge there. So that's one thing I would absolutely say is if that's what someone's looking for, yeah, look for the crazy, look for the little bit like, wow, that's eyebrow raisingly weird. Let's do that. I'm a huge fan of chasing those things as well. And then, even more broadly than that, what I would say to everyone coming into the games industry is, guess what? There is a new industry for you right now where you can use those superpowers for great good, right? You can improve the health of individuals, and you can help kind of whittle away that stigma of video games and help us and help the world realize how powerful and wonderful these interactive experiences really are.
I'm sure a lot of artists, not just in the video game industry, wants to also have impactful jobs. Being able to be an artist means expression, but so many artists in the world, especially today in a time of change and a little bit of unrest, they want to be able to help people. And Akili Interactive is definitely a place of art that's really directly helping people, as you said. So what advice would you give to artists to make their work meaningful and impactful in a very direct way?
Sure. The short answer is study the science. Look into where there are unmet needs for humanity, right? And then ask yourself, is there some technology or some possibly budding technology that could solve that problem? Because what I've seen now that I've opened my mind and my eyes more broadly in thinking that way about the world, I see a lot of places where people just take for granted the way things have been done in the past, right? And medicine is a great example of that. There have been wonderful advancements in medicine, of course, but there's a lot of areas where people have just been like, well, that's the way it's done. And so why would we even consider doing it differently? But when you stop and you pause and say, hold on, this could be so much better and technology can help, you discover all kinds of things. And, COVID has even shown this, right? I mean, telemedicine was, I think, a very kind of strange and foreign idea for a lot of people, or the idea of doing a remote therapy, for example, seemed a little bizarre. And now you're kind of forced into this new view of the world. And you're like, well, actually, that makes a ton of sense. And so I think for artists coming into the industry, like, yeah, study the science, look for the unmet need, reach out to the experts in those fields, even though it may be very distant from yours, because every day that goes by, I'm finding that an interactive experience can be applied to almost anything and make it better, even if that's just to improve a user experience of something like medicine, not to mention creating an actual video game. But we do know this from the neuroscience that it is experiences that change the brain. Sometimes good ones, your first kiss, sometimes bad ones, PTSD, right? But those do change the neurological network, and games and art are an incredible way to create experiences, and that's effectively what they are. So it's kind of a match made in heaven when you think about it that way.
It really is, and I love that. Experiences change the brain. I really hope the audience listened to that. That's just such a great quote, and so true as well. Now, before we end it off, looking towards the future, Akili Interactive is still developing like crazy. They're pushing forward in a lot of new realms. Can you talk a little bit about the process of developing new treatments for other diseases outside of purely ADHD?
Absolutely. Yeah, to date, we've run, I think, over 30 clinical trials in different cognitive areas. So our kind of first product that's out, the one that just got FDA cleared, is for pediatric ADHD specifically. And then we've run trials in, I can list a few off, and there's a longer list of ones to be run, but depression, anxiety, MS, believe it or not. So there's a significant cognitive impairment that comes along with the physical part of MS and the treatment. So we've run studies and shown great data to be able to help in those areas. There are Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mild cognitive impairment. It even gets into things like lupus and chemo fog. There's a ton of areas. And what's really interesting is that there's a commonality between a lot of these cognitive impairments, and attention tends to be one of them. In the case of ADHD, that's very obvious, right? That is part of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when you think about things like depression, as an example, it's a similar part of the brain that's having a hard time filtering distractions, right? And so in that case, there's sometimes like bad scenarios or bad thoughts, like, oh, this terrible thing's going to happen. I know better, but I can't kind of stop that idea from entering my head. And it's actually a very similar function that's going on in the brain, an executive function, to be able to say, that's not important, don't worry about that, focus on this, pay attention to this, not this. And so what neuroscience continues to discover, and what we continue to try to help and improve, is to fix some of these underlying things that actually stretch across multiple conditions, so that we can help the broadest range of people, and frankly, just learn more about the brain.
Well, it's incredible work. Matt, thank you so much for talking to me all about your career and all about Akili Interactive.
It's a pleasure, Jerry. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Akili Interactive. If you'd like more information about their incredible work, go to AkiliInteractive.com. This interview has been made possible by the View Conference. The View Conference is an amazing yearly CG event. For the first time ever, it is taking place both online and in person. It is taking place between October 18th and October 23rd. If you'd like information about events like these and how you can get tickets to the conference, go to ViewConference.It. That is ViewConference.It. I'm your host, Jerry Orrs from Kids First, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!